everyone. In this segment, we're going to talk about expectations and the difference between an expectation and something that I call the manual, which are assumptions that we have that we often don't explain to others. While they can feel very similar, they are not necessarily the same thing. By the end of this video, you should be able to clearly articulate the differences between expectations and the manual. In this lesson, we're going to talk about expectations some more, and we're going to dive into the difference between an expectation and something that I call the manual. They can feel very similar, but they're not necessarily the same thing. So let's talk about expectations. Expectations are first and foremost rules of engagement that you have for people on your team as it relates to how they work with one another and how they work with internal clients or colleagues and how they work with external clients or colleagues or customers. Another expression that we use oftentimes for expectations are that they are non-negotiables. These are things on the team that we don't argue about. For example, being honest. I don't argue with people about whether or not I expect them to be honest. I just expect them to be honest, right? You might have to argue, why do you even need to say that to people? But we can talk about that more in future discussions. But what I want to make sure is that a non-negotiable is something that we just agree and we move on. We don't argue about it. Expectations are agreed upon behaviors, norms, and practices that everyone on the team is held to. So these things, these expectations that we have are for everybody. And that's how an expectation differs from a goal, right? A goal could be something very specific to one person. An expectation is something that applies to everybody on the team. Again, using the example of being honest, we don't expect one group of people that we manage to be honest, whereas we expect other people on the team not to be honest, right? Honesty is something that I expect of everybody on the team. And the last thing is that expectations are value-based. So they tend to remain pretty consistent over time. Regardless of where you manage people, you're going to find that your expectations tend to be similar. As long as they're aligned to what the organization is expecting, they're not going to change much. So those are sort of those key elements, the 4 elements of expectations. They're rules of engagement, they're non-negotiable, they're agreed upon behaviors, norms, and practices that everyone on the team is held to, and they are value-based, so they tend to remain fairly constant over time. What's key about what I said in all 4 of those attributes is that they are agreed upon behaviors. So expectations are openly communicated and shared with the team. And honestly, when we get into some of the future discussion, they're not only shared, they are cultivated as a team. In my experience, the best teams, the most highest performing teams will work together to really establish expectations of one another and then hold each other to those expectations. It's so powerful when we do that as a group. But you as a leader have to get clear about what yours are first. Okay? So that's that key piece, that they're agreed upon behaviors. Now, I want to contrast expectations really quickly with something called the manual. The manual is something that I learned from my colleague, Brooke Castillo, at the Life Coach School years ago. And I share it now as often as I can with people who manage people because we all have this notion of the manual. What does that mean? The manual is a list of rules that we have for other people that we don't communicate. That's the key. Manual is stuff that we think about other people that we don't tell them. Here's some examples. People shouldn't shake my hand until I have worked with them for 6 months. I mean, that's a silly example. People should make eye contact. People shouldn't tap their pen in a meeting. People shouldn't twirl their hair. People shouldn't stand too close to me. People shouldn't stand too far away from me. People shouldn't swear. People should swear. Right? I mean, anything that you sort of in your mind use to judge other people that you don't then communicate to them, that's sort of an indication of a manual. Now, what happens with leaders is we all have this. Okay, here's the thing. And we talk about point of view, right, in our first course. We all have perspectives about people that we've cultivated over the years that we sort of use to judge other people, right? That's normal. That's just being a human being, okay? But the thing is once you get into a leadership role, you have to be really careful because our manual is not really relevant. And we can't use that. We can't use our rules for how people should be in the world against our employees. Okay? What we need to do is set expectations that are relevant to the performance of the organization. That's what an expectation is, right? These agreed upon behaviors, norms, and practices that apply to everyone, they have to be specific to the performance of the organization. So it might bug me that you twirl your hair in a meeting, but that is not an expectation.
right? That's just my rules, and that might be just something I need to work out. Like, that's not a big deal. So I always want to contrast the two because I think sometimes people get confused about what the difference is between an expectation and sort of their own kind of personal preference. And personal preference is not what we're talking about. Expectations are really those behaviors that you know will govern a solid, high-performing, powerful team. Okay, so in our next segment, we're going to talk more specifically about expectations and how to really set those and be clear about those so that everyone understands what they look like.
In this video, we talked about expectations in the manual. And remember that expectations are rules of engagement for the entire team. They apply to everybody. They're not like a performance goal that might be individual. These apply to everyone. They're agreed upon by everyone, they are non-negotiable, and they're generally value-based. Remember that most of the time our expectations don't change much from position to position. These tend to be the ways that we encourage people to work with each other on a team and with us as leaders. The manual, on the other hand, is a list of rules we have for other people, but we don't communicate them. So we can hold people sort of to an expectation or to a rule without really ever telling them what that is, and that's not effective as a manager. Leaders need to move beyond personal preference and what bugs us and what sort of drives us crazy and really set expectations that are relevant to organizational performance and really helping culture overall thrive.